The ILO has just launched the Global Employment Trends for Youth report for 2013, and we are going to present you its key findings.
It is not a good time to be a young person looking for a job, and the prospects don't look like they are getting better. The global recovery slowed down in 2012 and 2013 and made an already bad youth jobs crisis even worse. The global youth unemployment rate increased to 12.4% in 2012 and has continued to grow to 12.6% in 2013. In the advanced economies, little progress has been made in reducing youth unemployment since the height of the global crisis in 2009. The youth unemployment rate in 2012 was around 18.1%, the same as we saw in 2010, and the highest level in the advanced economies in 20 years. In the second quarter of 2012, the youth unemployment rate exceeded 15% in 2/3 of advanced countries. In addition, it takes longer and longer for young persons to find a job. In most advanced economies, 1/3 or more of young job seekers are unemployed for at least 6 months. If they do find a job, it is increasingly likely to be a part-time or a temporary job. There may be good reasons, of course, for young people to prefer such work, but the current labour market suggests that alternatives are often not available. Another part of the youth employment crisis is what we call skills mismatch. This is important in many countries, and in advanced economies it often shows in an extremely difficult position for those at the bottom of the educational pyramid. Unemployment rates for the low-skilled are often higher than those for the high-skilled, and differences increased from 2010 to 2011. A second type of skills mismatch has to do with having too much education. The strong increase in over-education from 2008 to 2010 by 1.4 percentage points suggests that youth with higher levels of education are increasingly taking up jobs for which they are overqualified. This suggests a further crowding out of opportunities at the bottom of the labour market, that is, for the low-skilled. Skills mismatch depresses wages, dulls job satisfaction, and reduces productivity. It also makes solutions to the youth employment crisis more difficult to find and more time-consuming to implement. We need to find the match between society's actual needs for sustainability and growth and young people's capabilities and dreams for their own future.
So we have just seen the alarming job situation for young people in developed economies. But what about the rest of the world? After all, 90% of our world's youth are still located in regions labeled as developing. One reason that we have never been able to say much has to do with the lack of good and regular data in developing countries. But in this edition of the Global Employment Trends for Youth, we are able to call upon some exciting new data sets from school-to-work transition surveys that were run in developing countries over the last year. The data is the result of a recent ILO partnership with the MasterCard Foundation called Work for Youth. The project is allowing us to really get to the core of challenges that young people face in 28 developing countries and shift the attention back to young people in the poorer regions. So what is the new data telling us? Well, first of all, it helps us to better demonstrate the differences between young labor markets in rich and poor countries. Oddly enough, it is not unemployment that differs across the developmental groups. The share of the youth population that is unemployed is remarkably similar in the least developed economies compared to the high-income economies. Rather, the big differences are found in the regularity of work. Very few young people in the least developed economies can find a job with a contract that goes beyond 12 months of duration. Instead, we show that half of the youth populations in low-income countries are engaged in what we call irregular employment. The other big difference is in the share of youth who are neither working nor looking for work. In other words, the inactive. In the wealthier economies, we find that more than half of the young people aged 15 to 29 years are inactive. Why? Well, most of them are still in school. This means that they are investing in their education so that they can better integrate in the labor market in the future. Not so in the low-income countries. Here, the number of young people going to school is still extremely low. Very few complete school even up to the high school level. So there is a great divide across the two development groups in terms of both the quality of employment available to young people and the access to education. Up to 2/3 of young people in some developing countries can't go to school and can't find a stable job. The lesser educated end up either unemployed or working in irregular, poor quality, low-wage jobs, frequently in the informal economy. We call this underutilization of the youth labor market. And in some low-income countries like Liberia, Malawi, and Togo, the share of underutilized young labor exceeds 70%. So who is getting the few available good jobs in developing economies? Firstly, one of the strongest predictors of who is making the transition to stable employment is the education level of the young person. Another predictor is sex. If you are a young male, you have a higher chance of finding a good and stable job in developing countries. To conclude, low levels of education and poor quality of employment remain as developmental stumbling blocks in developing economies. As many as 8 out of 10 young workers are in informal employment. 6 in 10 workers lack a stable employment contract. 5 in 10 are undereducated or overeducated for the work that they do, and 6 out of 10 young workers receive below average wages. Now, on the positive side, there is economic growth in many of these countries, and there is certainly a growing middle class that will help to push development along further in regions like sub-Saharan Africa. Signs of progress are there. Now it's just a matter of ensuring that the benefits of progress are accessible to the poor and middle class alike.